something that's been happening my whole life, and I'm 40 now, so I'm fairly embarrassed about it, to be honest. So I have a lot of resistance to making this video, but one thing I wanted for this channel is for me to just say things that are me trying my best to be as vulnerable and honest as possible, even if I don't want to say it, just because I think that's the stuff that really helps each other, and that's the stuff that heals. It's obviously for me as well, but it's something that has been going on for me, I think, for my whole life, but it really only started to it started to really affect me and really come to light was in the last, I think, about 5 years or so in relationships. So it happens with some relationships but not others. There is definitely the anxious avoidant interaction going on there. So, you know, some people deal with their pain by, they tend to avoid confronting it to some degree, or to avoid, you know, facing the issue. Or they need to go off and be alone for a long time, or whatever it is. And others are more anxious, where they want to sort it out now, they want to connect, they want to fix it, you know. And I definitely fall generally more on that side of things. But I noticed that there have been relationships that I have where it didn't happen, where maybe at the start it did a bit, but then we just got along so well and it was fine. It was one relationship in particular where we both just seemed kind of similar and it was fine. It's when I've gotten into relationships that fall more on the avoidant style, which is something I only started to experience when I was around my mid-30s with this one particular person I was with. And she was not necessarily super avoidant, but she was super independent in terms of, it just felt like she didn't really like me that much, right? Whether that was true or not, who knows? It was just her style, but that style of partnership just doesn't work for me and creates this kind of reaction in me that's very anxious. But if that doesn't occur, if nothing's ambiguous, everything is clear, and they, you know, then that issue doesn't arise. But when it does arise, it's so intense, and it really is a big problem, because it's not like I can just avoid those relationships, because there are people. It's definitely not as bad when we're not in a romantic relationship, like if it's my boss or whatever, but there are still those qualities there. So it is something that I'm working on, that I ultimately want to try to fix, not because I want to be in a relationship with someone avoidant, just because I want to function better as a human being, because having this kind of what feels like an atomic bomb inside me waiting to go off is obviously not ideal. So this only seems to start to happen when I start to form a kind of emotional connection with someone. And the way that seems to develop is that if I open up emotionally to people and I feel that I can trust them with that type of thing. There's also, if there's a relationship forming in terms of they seem open to something more than just, you know, hanging out, being friends, then suddenly it's like my mind and body realizes that this person can now hurt you. They can now leave you. They can now suddenly change how they feel about you and cause a lot of pain. So that then opens me up to the potential for this experience of that, right? The anxious type experience. If the person at some stage becomes ambiguous or unclear or avoidance or hiding or anything for me that the energy isn't clear, then it starts. Then I start to get a bit anxious with them. It's like I start to constantly look for reasons why they're going to leave me. And I think this is a common problem. But yeah, this opening happens. And once I'm open to this relationship, then they can hurt you, right? And it tends to just be, I kind of become obsessed with it. trying to find any indication that may happen, that they may leave, that they may be changing the way they feel. And I'm very analytical in this sense as well, and I've been this way ever since I was a kid, where I remember just, I remember once I got a girlfriend on like the last day of school before holidays. I think we had 2 weeks off or 3 weeks or whatever it was. This is in primary school when I was about, I don't know, what it would have been 10 or so. And I remember just obsessing about this girl all the weeks and stuff. And, we never spoke or anything. Maybe on the phone, I can't remember, I don't think so. And then I got back to school. I was just, I was just obsessing about her over the weeks, looking forward to seeing her. And then I got back to school and I think she broke up with me the first day back. But it was, something just causes me to really obsess about this stuff. It's like I'm always trying to figure people out. I'm always trying to analyze people and understand why. I'm very analytical of people's motives and actions and reactions. And it seems to me to be a kind of defense mechanism that I created when I was younger. And I do remember when I created it, during those times when I would, like, my parents would do things that didn't make sense. So my only protection against them was to just try to figure it out, and I'd sit in my room just analyzing everything, and it just created this kind of brain that just does that automatically, and it's very difficult to stop. I can stop it when things aren't serious, like if it's with my boss at work or whatever and it's not that serious and the relationship isn't that close, I can kind of just become mindful of it and stop it. But when someone is close to me, definitely in a romantic sense, even a close friendship to some degree, especially with a girl, which is one reason why, I tend to avoid being friends with girls. But then is when it's pretty much close to impossible for me to stop. When, if they give some indication that something's wrong or they're being avoidant, or, I tend to personalize it and make it about me. And then the anxiety starts, the heart beating, I just become obsessed, I can't sleep, I'm analyzing, I'm figuring it out, I'm trying to find a way to figure out what's going on. And yeah. So a little more about the experience of it. Essentially, it's just a kind of obsession, and I can feel it in the chest, this feeling of something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. It's resolved. I need to fix this, otherwise I can't handle the feeling in the chest, right? This anxiety. And it's difficult to know exactly where it comes from, whether, my thoughts are generating it, or there's emotions in the body that cause it, or, there's shame that's built up in the body that is being trying to be protected, things like that. But all I know is that as time goes on, if something's wrong in the relationship that I'm in, and the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that I will attack the relationship itself in order to save myself from myself, ultimately. Obviously, I'm not completely at fault for anything. Like, people are always interacting in some way, but these are my feelings, these are my problems, these are my mind that I, to some degree have awareness of and can control. So for me to blame other people for this, isn't right. But to say that I'm solely responsible isn't right either, because there's two people here. Some people do have unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict themselves, very avoidant people. It's not healthy sometimes. So, and again, I guess I could take responsibility in terms of it's my choice to be with these people, or it's my ignorance that caused me to want to be with someone who I just wasn't aware of this issue. But as time goes on, if there's too many of these triggers, if I'm getting too anxious, I will eventually attack the relationship itself to try to destroy it in order to in order to save myself, right? I will convince myself that the only way out of this is to remove it. And this is obviously not healthy. As soon as you attack the relationship itself, it affects trust, and trust is the sacred aspect of any relationship. And I believe a lot of these relationships should have ended because it just wasn't right for me at the time, wasn't right for both of us. But there were one in particular that I wish I hadn't, because there was other aspects to it that were very important to me, sort of a more professional aspect to it, that were very important to both of us. So what I wish is that I had the ability to just self-soothe and to be able to just let them do what they want to do. If they want to be avoidant, let them be avoidant. If they want to not talk about it, let them not talk about it. But it's so difficult for me because as I start becoming closer to someone, it triggers that feeling, that sense of wanting to fix, that obsession, that heart racing, the anxiety. And I do tend to get angry as well when this is happening, because if they're not meeting my expectations, I get angry, right? And I'm not saying this is right, it just is what it is. And then they will just keep not meeting my expectations, or not wanting to talk, or wanting to avoid, to the point that I just want to stop suffering. So I will attack the relationship. I will say, I don't want to do this anymore, I can't do this, it needs to end in some degree. And this causes a lot of problems, obviously. And it's very painful for both of us, because it's either the pain of the anxiety or it's the pain of the end of a significant relationship, which is just as bad, if not worse, because of the length of time. And, you know, if you try to heal it, it's very difficult, it's very painful. It takes so long to build trust again, if you can. So the goal is to be able to let people do what they want to do and just have the appropriate relationship with them that I could, rather than pushing against reality. To categorize the relationship into an appropriate category for myself so this doesn't happen. If there are signs of avoidant qualities, just to be able to categorize the relationship in a bit of a less so it's a less of an impact to me. But once it gets to a certain point, this is very difficult because the emotional connection has happened. So when I first discovered this fully, was I had this relationship maybe about 5 years ago. I was around 35, and like I said before, it was the one where she was super independent, to the point that it just seemed like she didn't really like me that much, which might have been true, I don't know. But, you know, we would walk together and she'd walk ahead of me, and I just never really felt like she was engaged with the relationship to any great degree. She was just too busy living her own life, right? And there's nothing wrong with this inherently, and I realize now that it's just a bad choice of person. But, you know, I kept trying to push against this. I kept complaining about things, and, you know, and yeah, it really awoke inside of me this pain that I never knew was there, this kind of, you know, I never could cry before I met this girl properly. And then just the confusion and the feeling like she was never really there, and it just started to make me cry a lot. And I was terrified of crying before this. And I mean, it sounds so childish now thinking about it, but it is what it is, you know, and I feel kind of ashamed to some degree. But it is what it is. This is the truth. And then I started to cry, even around her, and you know, because it was just never felt safe, you know. And then after we eventually broke up, inevitably, we were only together for a few months. Such a life-changing experience. But it was just so painful for me that the next year or so I spent crying. nearly every day I've just found a way I could make myself do it. And you know, I thought for a while this was quite healing. I think I was getting out things that from when I was a kid, you know, and sometimes the crying would turn into, you know, things about my mother and stuff, and you know, stuff that I'd been holding on to because as a child, as a man, you're very repressed in terms of crying, you know, ever since a kid, you know. When I was at primary school, guys would just judge each other so negatively if you cried at school, and you know, it's just drilled into a guy that you can't. But this is a natural function of the body, that is the way that the body heals from, you know, the loss of something. And if you don't do it, you become pretty fucked up. So I started to do it, and it was about a year after that that it sort of started to slow down a bit. But then I had this other relationship a couple of years after. This ended maybe 2 or 3 years ago, this one. And we genuinely loved each other, but our styles, her avoidance and my anxiety, was just like a nuclear bomb together, where we were loving towards each other, but as soon as something even slightly was critical towards her, that she would just shut down for sometimes days and days at a time, and this would trigger this anxiety that I'd never really seen before. The other girl, it was a little bit, but this was extreme, where it was just panic for days. I couldn't sleep. I was obsessed. It was really awful. And, you know, we were together for a year. We lived together. I think it might be more than a year. But this is the one where I really became aware of what's inside me, of the danger of it if I'm with the wrong person, or, you know, this is where I became so aware of this problem. And this is also where I became really aware of the choice of partner is so important, to really just scan for this stuff before you start getting too emotionally involved. And it did happen again with another friend of mine. We got too close, and yeah, but this time I was very aware of it. It's just that it was a complicated situation. But my awareness has definitely grown. But this situation was very painful, and it's sort of what sparked me to make this video, because I've just been thinking about it so much. But in terms of what I think causes it, it's definitely something to do with childhood, right? That sort of sparks this stuff, because when I was a kid, I had kind of extended neglect over a long period of time. We weren't really treated in a loving way. We weren't really allowed to speak our mind. It was very repressive, negative, depressed, angry, all this stuff. So I learned very young to repress myself. Otherwise, if I express myself, I you know, there's pain. And I think because of this, somewhere down the line, I gathered a lot of shame inside me. And I do still have it, and I still feel it, where I'm, you know, whether other people are like this or not, I don't know. But I think to some degree everyone has it. It just really, when I'm around or anything in relationship with other people, it comes out, this sense of embarrassment or not accepting myself or wanting to protect myself. And it's something to do with that, right? That sense of shame that we get. And maybe I get angry to protect the triggering of the shame, that sensitivity. Because animals in nature, they get angry isn't the right word for it. They get aggressive when you threaten their family or their own physical safety. And we get that too, but we also have a very complex emotional part of our anger, which is the same. If we threaten our emotional safety, we get angry. And so when my shame, or when it's possible that someone might leave me, and, you know, because I guess my carers, they weren't consistent. They were never happy. I couldn't rely on them. There was nothing, I couldn't rely on any sense of consistency or safety. So now I guess I constantly look for, in relationship, I look for people who are not, who potentially, well, during the relationship, I look at them and try to find when they potentially maybe not offering safety. And that causes me to overanalyze and all that stuff that I mentioned before. The anxiety, I'm guessing it's because of the thoughts, right? That when this shame or this sense of someone wanting to leave me, I try to control it by analyzing it, and these racing thoughts just create a panic state. Or unless there's a panic state being activated that causes the racing thoughts, it's hard to know one or the other, because when it's happening, it feels impossible to stop. It really is it's so powerful that it just feels impossible. But the way that I'm trying to fix it, is there's multiple avenues. Obviously, the most obvious one is choose the right partner. So I scan people very closely. I do avoid relationships to a great degree. And I'm very careful, very, very careful. I ask questions, I figure stuff out, which is good. That comes with wisdom, that comes with time. But also it's not ideal because I want more friends, I want more relationships. So I meditate, I work on my mindfulness, work on feeling emotions. I work on feeling grief, feeling anger, trying to feel the anxiety in the body. I spend time in type of emotional meditations where I'm really bringing awareness to these things and allowing them to process. I don't see any great development from this. There's been no great change in terms of just the physical part of it in this problem ever since I've recognized it. I'm more wise about it, I'm more aware of it, I know how to choose people, I know what's happening, but in terms of the physical problem, I haven't seen any change. So maybe it's impossible to change. Maybe it's just a part of me that I have to learn to manage. But I'm trying, right? But if anyone out there has this issue, especially if someone has fixed it, had it at one point but eventually fixed it, please let me know. Drop a comment, send me a message, whatever, because I would love to know. Some methods there that you've actually repaired this at the core of the problem, where you became more secure, more comfortable, less shame, anger, anxiety in relationships and in life in general. So I hope that was informative, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and all the best. Cheers.